Drugs, motorcycles, riding with your gang, breaking all the rules. It sounds like living the dream, or can it be a full-on nightmare? It was the Great Darkness in Canada, governed by a very conservative National Union Party who ruled with an iron fist. In 1960, when they stepped out, the Liberals took over and brought in some changes, leading to some consequences that were unplanned, such as a sharp and sudden increase in drug abuse, teenage pregnancies, and the reason for this story: violent motorcycle club rivalries. In the late 70s, a lot of lives were changed, and everyone knew the name Yves Apache Trudeau, a 22-year-old man who joined a MC, Popeyes. This club was known for its racketeering, loan sharking, contract killings, and violence, which is why they caught the attention of the Hells Angels MC. During this time, young men saw an opportunity to rebel against their former rules and go all out. They joined and created motorcycle clubs and gangs, which led to there being around 350 outlaw gangs in the streets of Quebec. Some hitmen feared going into Montreal because of the reputation this area built up. They used to call it the Red Zone. They just didn't want to go there. Two of the biggest rival gangs were Popeyes and Satan's Choice. They both wanted to control the drug game in Quebec, which meant they were in constant war with each other. Satan's Choice was cornered by Outlaws, a rival of Hells Angels, and so after being convinced by the Hells Angels, the Popeyes decided to team up with them and become a chapter in Canada. It turns out Yves Trudeau was one of the founding members of the Hells Angels chapter in Quebec, and he was one of the president's favorites. He was well known for his skills in assassinating people, and he also deemed himself as the ace assassin of the Hells Angels. He had no conscience and no respect for human life, as was clear in the way he killed people. He didn't care about how he did it. It was just a means to an end for him. He killed his victims by shooting, stabbing, strangulation, and what did he do to earn the nickname Apache? You guessed it. He scalped a victim. It didn't matter to him if you were a civilian, his partner, or his loved one. If you were in the war, or if he saw you as a witness, he would end your life in the blink of an eye. Apache's favorite method of killing was, of course, by using explosives, as you will see later in this story. If these two gangs ever saw each other in a bar, or on the street, they would start attacking each other and fights would break out. February 19th, 1978, two members of the Outlaws dressed in their full gang insignia went into a bar, which was known by everyone to be protected by the Hells Angels. The two men sat at the bar and had some drinks, but were soon forcefully removed by the Hells Angels. While they were out on the street, a fight broke loose. Minutes after this happened, a body was lying lifeless on the ground, by the hands of no other than Trudeau. He drove by in a car, stopped, and started shooting, killing a member of the Outlaws and leaving the other one injured. This event is what violently sparked the gang war between the Outlaws and the Hells Angels, the first biker war. The Outlaws gang was losing this war, and they knew they had to hit the Hells Angels where it hurts if they wanted to survive this, because as it stood during the following months, the Outlaws lost some key members, whereas the Hells Angels only had one member who grazed his arm in a drive-by shooting that went wrong. In October 1978, the president of the Hells Angels Canada chapter, Yves Trudeau, met up with the president of an Ontario-based gang, the Wild Ones, as he wanted to get a foothold into the Ontario region. This meeting took place in a bar and was mercilessly interrupted when two members of the Outlaws gang opened fire with a pistol and a shotgun, killing two Outlaws members, one Hells Angels member, and leaving others seriously injured. The two presidents of the two clubs who met for the meeting survived, and soon after the attack, Trudeau learned that Dutemple, the leader of the Outlaws gang, was behind the attack. His number one priority was to retaliate and kill Dutemple. This put Yves Trudeau in a position where he wanted to be, an assassin. 1 month later, Trudeau saw a man walking in the street who resembled Dutemple, and he asked him if he is indeed de Temple, but in French. Upon the silence of the civilian, he decided to shoot him in the back of his head, point blank, without hesitation. He laughed hysterically when he saw in the news that the person he murdered on the street was in fact a German tourist, and he did not respond to his question because he didn't understand French. Trudeau did not care about his mistake at all. He was mad because the Hells Angels member did not agree to pay him, even though he argued that he feels every man who looks like de Temple should be killed, even if it isn't him. His gang members did not agree with him at all. 4 months later, Trudeau killed the real de Temple by way of his favorite method, planting a bomb in his car. After that, Buteau heard rumors that the outlaws were going to gang up with another gang in the region, the Huns, and he instructed Trudeau to kill the leader of the Huns. He knocked on his door, and as soon as he opened the door, he shot him in the head. Trudeau was favored by Buteau as a hitman because he was discreet and he did his job well. He was sent to Laval to open a Hells Angels chapter there in the north of Montreal. This chapter became famous for their drug abuse, frequent arrests, and violent behavior. This made the entire Hells Angels club look bad. During all of this, there was still a gang rivalry between the Outlaws and the Hells Angels. And even though the Hells Angels endured some major setbacks, the Outlaws was still pulling on the shorter end. In 1982, the leader of the West End gang, who was allies with the Hells Angels, told Buteau that 2 of his chapter's members were conspiring to kidnap his children, for him to forget about the money they owed him. He told him that he either had to stop these 2 members, or he will stop the Hells Angels from getting the drugs brought in by the West End gang. He had to decide quickly, and he had to do so very discreetly. He asked Trudeau to kill these 2 men, without effort. He met them at a bar for drinks, drove them out to the river, and shot them, before throwing their bodies into the river. 1983, Buteau was ambushed and killed outside a restaurant by an Outlaws member. He was shot with a .38 caliber in the chest, killing him instantly. His funeral took place later that year, where more than 150 members of the Hells Angels showed up, from chapters all over the world, including the United States, Europe, and Canada. The day after his funeral, a young boy found a bomb that was camouflaged placed at the venue of the funeral. The police reckoned that it was the work of the Outlaws and that the bomb malfunctioned. This bomb would have killed a lot of members of the Hells Angels. Buteau's death didn't change the fact that the Outlaws was still losing the war, because later that year, the Hells Angels assassinated the new president of the Montreal chapter of the Outlaws and 2 of his lieutenants. The last straw happened in 1984. The Hells Angels did some major damage to the Outlaws club, and they decided to leave Montreal and move into their stronghold in Ontario. This meant that Trudeau didn't have a lot of work to do. The war was over. The Hells Angels was now in full control of the drug trade in Quebec. The new leader of the West End gang contacted Trudeau with a job. He learned that the previous leader was murdered by 4 members of his own gang, and he wanted to have them killed. He heard them bragging about it. This was Trudeau's most famous assassination. He found out that these 4 men were hiding out in a downtown Montreal apartment building, mainly used for student housing. They didn't leave the building often, so he had to come up with another plan. He sent gifts to their apartment, which consisted of a television, VCR, and a tape of Hells Angels Forever, a propaganda film made by the Manhattan chapter. The TV exploded when he detonated the bomb that he put in there, killing all 4 men and leaving a lot of damage to neighboring apartments. In the meantime, internal strife in the Hells Angels was tearing the club apart. The Laval chapter's reputation just got worse and worse by the day, and the Southern Montreal chapter thought that they made the entire club look bad. They demanded that something should be done. The Laval chapter was prohibited from using drugs. They didn't care though. They continued with their leisure activities, and Trudeau was replaced by another president. This is where things got bad. everyone started demanding that the Laval chapter should be taken care of and held a secret meeting and decided how everyone should be dealt with. They called a meeting with the Laval chapter, but Trudeau didn't show up. He sensed something was wrong and booked himself into a rehab a week earlier. This meeting is known today as the Lennoxville Massacre, where all the Laval chapter members were killed. When Trudeau came out of rehab, he did not know anything about what happened. He just found out that he is kicked out of the gang, which meant he is now a marked man. However, he will be safe if he killed the accountant of the Laval chapter, who did not show up to the meeting either. He strangled him, but found out that he was still a marked man when he got arrested with a weapon charge. He heard rumors that the person who kills him in prison would receive $50,000. So, he started testifying against the Hells Angels. He started working as an informant for the police, which put the government in a weird position, because even though they needed the information, and he had helped them solve 90 murders that were cold for so long, the fact was that he killed 43 of those 90. He also admitted to 29 shootings, 10 bombings, 3 beatings, and 1 strangulation. 10 were innocent civilians. They made a deal that he pleads guilty to 43 counts of murder, which sentenced him to life in prison, although he was eligible for parole in 7 years. He had a luxurious cell and was paid a lot. The public was outraged because of this. They felt that there was no justice whatsoever. Trudeau was released after serving 9 years. He was given a new identity, and he got a job at a nursing home. He met a girl, and they were dating, even though she did not have a clue what or who he was. When he got laid off at work, he started falling back into old habits and started using cocaine. After that, he raped a 14-year-old boy, which put him back into prison, but only for 4 years. Luckily, because he was still on probation, he was sentenced to life in prison again. The judge said, "In this lifetime, he took more lives than the Canadian military in the Gulf War." Trudeau was kept in solitary for 23 hours a day for his own safety and was diagnosed with bone marrow cancer in 2006. He was nothing but a skeleton who needed a wheelchair to get around and spoke with a raspy voice. 2 years later, he died at the age of 62. Killing to him is like buying a bag of milk. A guy like that doesn't have a soul. Cancer is justice. A Trudeau victim's sister.